All right. So if you could start by stating your name and briefly describing the organization or organizations that you work with.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Glenn Mitoma, and I am a lecturer at the Institute for the Study of Rights at Columbia University. And then I'm also a steering committee member on HRE USA.
Great, thank you. And could you please describe your human rights education and training work?
My human rights education and training work revolves largely around my role at Columbia. So I'm a faculty member who teaches a wide range of both undergraduate and graduate courses for students enrolled in our human rights major and minor, as well as our master's program. I also conduct research into human rights education, both the history and practice of human rights education. And then I seek to kind of foster more opportunities for members of the community more broadly to engage in human rights learning. And that may include groups like teachers, K through 12 teachers of different sorts, but also museum educators, business people, folks in the sports and athletics world. So really thinking about how to create opportunities for human rights education and training in a number of different locations.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what is one aspect of your human rights education work that you are especially proud of?
So I guess right now, I think I'm particularly proud or excited and really honored to be a part of the education journey of so many undergraduates at Columbia. Now is a really challenging time to be in the human rights field for a variety of reasons. But being at Columbia, a lot of the students arrive there with a lot of advantages, frankly. They could go into many different fields and engage in lots of different ways. The ones who end up in our classrooms are ones who've deliberately chosen a path that foregrounds justice as their primary area of concern. They're really dedicated to the principles of human rights and see themselves as embodying that not only during their time at Columbia, but in the future as they go out into the world and make their way in a variety of different careers. And so, I think my part in that, I would characterize as having kind of three main functions. First, I think is like the the Hippocratic oath of do no harm, right? I mean, the students come into both our undergraduate and graduate programs, as you know, Kylie, with incredible talents and abilities and interests. And I've seen far too often educational experiences that dampen those passions, that bleed off some of the enthusiasm and excitement and passion that students bring. And I, for one, really want to create learning environments in which that passion grows rather than diminishes, and they really begin to understand the role they can play in advancing human rights. I think the second thing for me is to ground them in some key aspects of human rights knowledge, connection to resources and opportunities, and then to provide space for them in community with fellow students, members of the faculty, other stakeholders at Columbia, to grow in their own commitments and understandings of how to enact human rights practice in a variety of ways. And then I guess the kind of last way I see myself participating in this, um, uh, really, and this is the kind of flip side of the passion that brings them in. I think there can be a tendency for human rights students, or a risk among human rights students, to become self-righteous in their approach to these critical issues. Obviously, they've got a clear understanding of the justice and ethics of global human rights. But at the same time, there's a risk that that becomes a stance that claims the moral high ground, and a sense that they know always what is right in every circumstance. And I think part of our role in these human rights classrooms is to foster a sense of self-reflection, of humility, of democratic engagement across the board with people who agree and don't agree, and to foster a capacity to act that is collaborative, consensual, non-coercive, in all the kind of important dimensions that most human rights practitioners recognize. So, those are, I guess, the three main ways that I think of my kind of current work as the most interesting and exciting.
Thank you. My next question is, why do you think human rights education and training is important?
Okay. Well, human rights education and training is so important, really because it is, in my view, the primary mechanism for realizing human rights. I think traditionally within the human rights field, law and politics are privileged over all else. There's this sense that, human rights victories only come through the work of lawyers in strategic litigation or diplomats sitting around a table or political leaders in positions of power who can implement and enforce human rights regulations. To my mind, the expansion of a universe in which more and more individuals are able to enjoy their human rights, quite apart from whether or not treaties are ratified or courts make ruling, is a matter ultimately of education, of the growth not only in individuals' capacity to recognize themselves as rights holders and to understand different ways in which they can promote their own and other rights, but in fact for communities to learn together about pathways from a current world situation in which human rights are, on the run in lots of ways, to be able to imagine together a future in which human rights are realized. In my classes a lot of times, right, the kind of critical question comes, right, well, how do these things get enforced? As if human rights was really a matter of imposing your will on someone else's, all right, to lead them, unwillingly drag them toward a human rights future. And while, undoubtedly there are circumstances in which the law and politics and, agonistic politics plays a role, I think the long-term future for human rights rests in the realm of human rights education.
Thank you. I know you have a lot of strong feelings about human rights education. I appreciate you answering that question.
Sure. Yeah. No.
Loaded. My last question for you is how did you get involved with HRE USA, and how has your connection to HRE USA made a difference to you?
So Human Rights Educators USA really popped on my radar when I took over as the director of the Dodd Center at the University of Connecticut. The Dodd Center was a kind of outreach and engagement center that was looking to translate the academic resources of UConn's human rights program into direct impact in communities. And one of the threads that I thought was really essential for us was to make human rights education more widely available to all members of the Connecticut community, right? UConn is the flagship public state university. We have an obligation to serve all of Connecticut's people. My thought was that the primary way an educational institution like UConn could do that was by expanding access. And so, there were a number of projects that kind of went on under that banner at the Dodd Center, but really importantly for me then was to plug into this network of practitioners, scholars, educators, students, advocates, and others who had been focused on human rights education, for the better part of 10 years. And I was fortunate to, kind of stumble across them and to reach out and, begin to get a sense of, that community. And then I kind of dove in. I became a member of the steering committee. We spent some time doing some strategic strategic planning, thinking together as a group about how to make us most effective. Um, and I guess, my sense is that it's made a huge difference for me personally. Um, like many people in higher education, I had no formal training in education as such, right? We're kind of academics. We're taught about our research methods, and we're asked to, dig deep into the creation of new knowledge. And then we're thrown in a classroom and asked to, relate to young people in a way that brings them along. So HRE USA actually provided me with some important professional development opportunities that really shaped the way I approach the classroom today. I think the second way it made a real difference to me is that it provided a place where the people I was working with, educators in particular, when they were excited about human rights and wanted to do more, it was a place I could send them. That I knew, one, that they would be welcomed, that it's this kind of open community that is really caring about bringing more people on board, and two, would have a broad set of resources that could benefit them as educators in the classroom, but also provide them opportunities to go beyond the classroom and work on advocacy projects, bring their students to the United Nations, for instance, for consultations, to meet other educators across the country who have similar interests, who face similar challenges, and can support one another. So, in both of those ways, it's really been my kind of go-to organization for anybody who's interested in getting involved in human rights education.
Great, great. Thank you. So that was the last question. I want to thank you for your time today. And now I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.